On August 2, 1985, a Delta Airlines flight on final approach to Dallas, Texas flew into a thunderstorm, expecting to be out in less than a minute. Instead, an unknown force dragged it out of the sky and slammed it onto the ground, sending the wide-body Lockheed L-1011 skidding across a field and highway before slamming head-on into a water tank. Only 27 of the 152 people on board could survive, walking away from the tangled wreckage that had claimed many lives. What exactly happened to the flight? Watch the complete video to find out. Hello and welcome to Plane Crashes Explained, where we discuss some of the most mind-blowing reasons and facts behind the most heinous plane crashes. Subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon so you don't miss future updates. Without further ado, let's get straight into this. According to investigators, the crash of Delta Flight 191 was the middle rather than the beginning of a battle against the deadly weather phenomenon known as a microburst. The terrifying invisible force that the pilots perceived in their final moments had a name, and its basic nature was understood, but effective countermeasures as well as the data required to develop them did not exist at that time. Faced with an increasing death toll and a threat that could not be driven away, aviation experts and meteorologists collaborated to develop technologies that would demystify the microburst, resulting in significant changes that would affect everyone who would fly. Flight 191 was a wide-body, three-engine Lockheed L-1011 TriStar, Delta's pride and joy, piloted from the airline's most experienced crews. The 300-passenger jet was only half full, having taken off from Fort Lauderdale, Florida earlier that afternoon with 152 passengers and 11 crew. Captain Edward Ted Connors, 57, was in command, a Korean War veteran with over 29,000 flying hours and a sterling reputation. He was assisted by two equally well-regarded junior crew members, 42-year-old First Officer Rudy Price Jr. and 43-year-old flight engineer Nick Nasick, both of whom had served in Vietnam and brought another 13,000 hours of flying experience with them. Flight 191 was a regularly scheduled passenger flight from Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, to Los Angeles International Airport in Los Angeles, California, with a scheduled stop at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport in Fort Worth, Texas. The flight took off from Fort Lauderdale at 14:10 Central Daylight Time on an instrument flight plan. The weather forecast for DFW on the flight's dispatch stated a possibility of widely scattered rain showers and thunderstorms. Another weather alert issued by the dispatcher warned of an area of isolated thunderstorms over Oklahoma and northern and northeastern Texas. Before takeoff, the flight crew reviewed these notices. A weather formation near the Gulf Coast strengthened as the plane flew over New Orleans, Louisiana. The flight crew decided to deviate from the planned route to arrive at DFW via the more northern Blue Ridge route. The flight hovered over the Texarkana, Arkansas vortex for about 10 to 15 minutes. At 17:35, the crew received an automatic terminal information service broadcast for weather on approach to DFW, and the air traffic controller at the Fort Worth Air Route Traffic Control Center cleared the flight to the Blue Ridge, Texas vortex and instructed the flight to descend to 25,000 feet. "Looks like it's raining over Fort Worth," the second officer observed at 17:51:19. The Fort Worth ARTCC controller transferred the flight to DFW Airport Approach Control at 17:51:42, and the flight was cleared to descend to 7,000 feet. 2 minutes later, the controller instructed the Delta flight to deviate by 10 degrees and reduce their speed to 180 knots. The flight acknowledged the request. The crew prepared the aircraft for landing as the flight descended. The feeder controller cleared the flight to 5,000 feet at 17:56:19. The controller announced 9 seconds later that rain was approaching the airport from the north and that the airport would be using an instrument landing system. Flight 191 was instructed to slow to 170 knots and turn to the heading 270 degrees at 1851. At 18:01:34, Flight 191 was instructed to descend to 3,000 feet. After 1 minute, the approach controller directed the plane to runway 17 left and cleared it for an ILS approach at or above 2,300 feet. Half a minute later, the controller requested that the flight reduce its speed to 160 knots, which the crew agreed to. "And we're getting some variable winds out there due to a shower, out there north end of DFW," the controller said at 18:03:30. "Stuff is moving in," an unidentified flight crew member said a few seconds later. Simultaneously, the cockpit voice recorder recorded the start of a sound identified as rain hitting the cockpit. "You're gonna lose it all of a sudden," the captain warned Price. The ground proximity warning system began a series of whoop whoop pull up audible warnings at 18:05:44, with the aircraft descending at more than 50 feet per second. The captain responded by saying toga, which is aviation jargon for apply maximum thrust and abort landing by going around. The first officer responded by pulling up and raising the plane's nose, slowing but not stopping the plane's descent. At 18:05:52, the aircraft's landing gear made contact with a plowed field 6,336 feet north of the runway and 360 feet east of the runway centerline while still descending at a rate of around 10 feet per second. Flight 191 remained structurally intact on the ground while rolling high speed across the farmland. As the aircraft approached Texas State Highway 114, the main landing gear left shallow depressions in the field that extended for 240 feet before disappearing and reappearing a few times. The plane collided with a highway streetlight, and its nose gear landed in the westbound lane of Highway 114, skidding across the road at over 200 miles an hour. The plane's left engine collided with a Toyota Celica driven by 28-year-old William Mayberry, killing him instantly. As the plane continued south, it collided with two more streetlights on the highway's eastbound side and began to fragment. As the aircraft continued along the ground, the left horizontal stabilizer, some engine pieces, portions of the wing control surface, and parts of the nose gear came off. Later, witnesses testified that fire was coming from the left wing route. All airport fire and emergency units were notified within 1 minute of the crash. 3 fire trucks from the airport's Fire Station Number 3 arrived 45 seconds after being alerted and began fighting the fire. Additional units from Fire Stations Number 1 and 2 arrived within 5 minutes, and despite strong winds and heavy rain, the fire was mostly under control within 10 minutes of the alert being issued. The first paramedics arrived within 5 minutes of the crash and immediately established triage stations. On-scene EMTs estimated that without the on-scene triage procedures, at least half of the surviving passengers would have died, according to later testimony to NTSB officials. The Dallas-Fort Worth Airport Department of Public Safety, the Texas Department of Public Safety, the Irving Fire Department, the Irving Police Department, and all available Third Watch personnel from the Dallas Police Department's Northwest Patrol Division and the northeastern sector of the Fort Worth Police Department's Patrol Division responded to the crash. Following a lengthy investigation, the NTSB determined that the crash was caused by pilot error, combined with extreme weather phenomena associated with microburst-induced wind shear. A lack of specific training, policies, and procedures for avoiding and escaping low-altitude wind shear was also determined to be a contributing factor by the NTSB. The NTSB blamed the accident on the inability of aircraft radar to detect microbursts. At the time, radar equipment aboard aircraft could only detect thunderstorms, not wind changes. Following the investigation, NASA Langley Research Center modified a Boeing 737-200 to serve as a test bed for an onboard Doppler weather radar. After the Federal Aviation Administration mandated that all commercial aircraft have onboard wind shear detection systems, the resulting airborne wind shear detection and the alert system were installed on many commercial airliners in the United States. The NTSB also chastised the airport for failing to notify emergency services and surrounding municipalities promptly. While the airport's on-site emergency services were notified almost immediately, the DFW Department of Public Safety Communications Center did not begin notifying off-site emergency services until nearly 10 minutes after the crash and did not finish until 45 minutes later. DPS also failed to request ambulances from the nearby communities of Irving, Grapevine, and Hearst during notifications. However, Hearst responded with ambulances after personnel from its ambulance company overheard the airport crash report on a radio frequency scanner. Following the crash and subsequent NTSB report, DFW's DPS improved its post-crash notification system, including added an automated voice notification system to shorten notification times. Following the crash of Delta Airlines Flight 1141 as it took off from DFW in 1988, DPS completed its notification of nearby emergency services in 21 minutes, which the NTSB described as a significant improvement over response times following the Delta Flight 191 crash. The lack of critical information and flying through a heavy thunderstorm were the main reasons for the crash. Storms do come all the time, but the airline crew now has special training to deal with the situation. Why did the plane crash in your opinion? Let us know in the comments section. If you liked the video, here are 2 more to watch. Please leave a like on the video and share it with your family. Thanks for watching.